Okay, we can get started. Good morning to everybody, or good evening, or early good morning to wherever you are signing up from. My name is Murtaza Jafaji. I will be the moderator for this session. And what the title of this session, which I believe that all of you can see because I have shared my screen, is the structure and direction of Sri Lanka's merchandising exports and the shipping industry. So I have invited four prominent speakers. Ms. Ashraf Omar, who is the Managing Director of Brandix, one of the largest apparel operating groups, both out of Sri Lanka and with many operations all over the world. Mr. Dilhan Fernando, who is the CEO of Dilmah Tea, one of the largest branded tea exporters in Sri Lanka. Prabhash Subasinghe, who happens to be the chairman of the EDB, but initially I have asked him to speak about businesses that he's also in, namely the seafood industry and the export of rubber tires and generally the rubber industry. And we also have Mr. Romesh David, who is the CEO of South Asia Gateway Terminal, which is one of the terminal operators in the port of Colombo, which is majority owned by John Keys. So on that note, I would like to give a brief introduction and presentation about Sri Lanka's merchandising exports and a few slides to explain the shipping industry. First of all, what is the definition of merchandising exports? Merchandise exports are tangible goods produced by a country's firms within a period of time and sold abroad. So generally, if you talk about exports, it includes goods and services. This discussion is specifically about tangible goods because they are physical in nature and have different types of challenges and characteristics. So in 2009, we exported close to $12 billion of merchandising exports. Now, this value comes from FOB. So it's not the CIF value, it's the FOB value. That is how Comtrade, which is a UN agency, compiles statistics. So what were the major categories of exports? Garments, textiles and garments was about 5.6 billion, comprising of about 47%. Then tea was about 1.3 billion. Rubber products were about 900 million. And petroleum products was about 520 million. Most people will be surprised to see petroleum products, but this is mainly the export of aviation fuel when aircraft land in Sri Lanka, and also bunkering oil, and maybe some other small products. So where do they go? So 26% of our exports go to the US, that's merchandising exports, and Asia 13%, Europe 16%, Middle East 10%, UK, etc. So I've used the Harvard Atlas, Economic Atlas, which takes Comtrade data and maps the whole world's trade. It's a nice visualization platform, but unfortunately data is only updated in 2017. But graphically, it will show you what the structure and direction of our exports. So the total goods and services exports is close to 20 billion, and you can see the big role that tourism has played. And transport is 12%. The reason why you get such a large number is that, as I said, the Comtrade data is compiled at FOB. So the insurance and freight component gets categorized under different service sectors. So based on the same data, this shows you the structure of Sri Lanka's merchandising exports. And you can see the green is the apparel industry and the orange is agriculture. And then inside the purple is the rubber industry, and then you have small industries. Where did these merchandising exports go? So this shows you the direction of export trade. And you can see a significant amount of merchandising exports went to the United States. And the blue area is the European Union. And then the green area is Asia. And this shows you the structure of textile exports. So the way the HS code system works, is apparel is a subcategory in textiles. So textiles could also include raw materials. And if you look on the left side, you can see that a significant composition is in undergarments, women's undergarments. And that's because some of our manufacturers have been fortunate enough to work with some of the high-end brands, which hopefully Ashraf can speak about. So this is where the direction of where these textile exports went. And you can see that it seems to be a similar share. This is 2017 data, so I don't have 2019 data, but it's a similar kind of share between the United States and the European Union. And similarly, as you know that textile apparel has large global value chains, which means that we assemble garments and we may be adding more value, but there's a lot of imports also coming to facilitate those exports. And this shows you the composition of those imports. In 2017, it's been valued about 3 billion. And where do these textile imports come from? And you can see that as of 2017, 40% has come from China. The next export sector is agriculture, and that's the entirety of the tree map being orange. And a substantial amount, something like 45%, is tea. And this further breaks down of what, so if it's about 3 kilos, that means it's more like bulk tea or tea packed in fairly large boxes. And the one less than 3 kilos is probably tea bags and packeted tea in smaller volumes. So this is where the direction of tea exports. And you can see the green area is predominantly the Middle East and Asia. And also know that many of these Middle Eastern countries are also oil exporting countries. And you can see also in blue that you have the Russian Federation, which is also a large oil and commodity exporter. And you must be well aware what has happened to the price of oil. This is an analysis of rubber exports. And this shows you the structure of rubber exports and the different products that are sent out. And the largest component is rubber tires. And hopefully Prabhash can enlighten us on that. So this is where rubber exports went. A majority of it went to the EU, followed by North America, followed by Asia. So again, under the agricultural sector is seafood exports, and the HS code defines it as fish. But below that, they have different types of fish and crustaceans, which are prawns and crabs, etc. So we have exported about $272 million according to Comtrade data in 2017. That figure may be a little bit higher by now. And this is where our seafood exports went to. Again, it's almost a three-way split between Europe, Asia, and North America. And this shows you our share in these export categories. Textiles is a large category and it's showing only 0.5%. I mean, according to Comtrade, it's like almost a $2 trillion trade. But apparel, both knitted and non-knitted, is about a $450 billion trade, of which Sri Lanka probably has about a 1.5% market share. So I have a small issue with these slides, so I have to Okay. So I'm afraid that this is not perfect, but I think most of you can see. This shows you the composition of shipping, the shipping industry. And in 2018, in seaborne trade, containerization was 16%. And this shows you what has been happening over a period of time. Again, you can see that containerization, the share of containerization of all maritime trade has marginally been going up, which means that the total volume of trade has been growing slower, but some of the non-containerized cargo is being converted into container cargo. This shows you the growth in container traffic, and post financial crisis, it has been growing at a slower speed. Again, I don't have the updated data, but perhaps the trade in containers is about close to 800 million a year. And this map shows you the direction of trade, and a majority of seaborne trade in containers is across the Pacific. The Trans-Pacific trade accounts for about 46%. And this is Sri Lanka. And the red line tries to illustrate the maritime route. And it shows that Hambantota is 1 hour away from us, and the Colombo port is about 5.5 hours from us. And this shows you an overview of the Colombo port. So I've asked Romesh to give a kind of overview of what's happening in the port currently. And he's SAGT, which is where my cursor is moving. This is SAGT. And this is CICT, which is operated by China Merchant Holding. And this is called the East Terminal. And 400 meters of the East Terminal has been already developed. And there is a marshalling yard, which Romesh will probably say how they are using it temporarily to deal with the huge amount of uncleared containers in the port. This shows you how the cargo volumes in the Colombo port has been growing over the years. And there has been a significant growth. I don't have the figures for 2019, but till the end of 2018, we have touched 7 million, and that figure probably would have gone up marginally in 2019. And the main catalyst for the growth has been the significant contribution that came from CICT. This graph shows you the role CICT has played in growing container volumes. And you can see that when CICT opened towards the end of 2013, the gray part, it took a small share. But over a period of time, not only was it maybe marginally cannibalizing the share of some of the other terminals, but it was the biggest contributor for this growth. And this side shows you the transshipment volume, and this side shows you the domestic volume. So the transshipment volume at the end of 2018 was about 5.5 million TEUs. And the balance has been domestic cargo. And the split of domestic cargo also has changed over a period of time. Now, we are mainly a transshipment port, and this shows you all the different ports in India. And most of our transshipment cargo is going to the east ports of India on this side of the Indian Ocean. This shows you a comparison of container volumes coming out of China and what is coming out of India. And although our eggs are pretty much in the Indian basket, when you compare to the enormous volume coming out of China, India is maybe 5%, or maybe a little bit more than 5% of their total volume. Again, I don't have the latest statistics, but I don't think it would have significantly changed. Now coming to the evolution of ships. And this is important for you to understand the dynamics that CICT, which is in the new port, has played. So ships over a period of time have become enormous. And the new class of ships, which are called ultra large carriers, ULCCs, are large ships. They are probably categorized typically above 14,000 TEUs. And this is this category of ship that you have. And this is the evolution of ships over a period of time. So the ultra large carriers have about 14,000 TEUs. And typically their length is 400 meters. And their depth is 15.5 meters. And their breadth is 56. So most of their ability to carry large amount of cargo is somewhat constricted by their length, but it's about by stacking more containers on top. And that's where you need a greater draft, and it's about the width of the ship. So this slide kind of explains what's going on. That the ultra large carriers basically stack about 23 boxes wide, while the pre-ultra large carriers have about 17 boxes wide, and therefore their depth is lot less, 14 meters. And the ultra large carriers have about 17 meters, which means that a loaded ULCC cannot go into the traditional port because it's not deep enough. And that is where the new southern terminal is the only place that these large ships can go. And at the moment, CICT is the only operating terminal that can host these ships. Now, why does this matter? Now, this graph tries to explain the economics of ships. So what's happening is the ship-related cost on a unit basis is going down because of the scale economies of these very large ships. But the land side costs are increasing because when you have these large size ships coming, there's a lot more volume and the logistics are a lot more complicated. You need larger size equipment, you need bigger cranes because the ships are taller, wider, and therefore the reach and the turnaround time gets longer. And shipping lines, this shows you the major shipping lines in the world. And increasingly, they have got into alliances. And these are the big, large alliances. This is, again, a little bit dated. This may have changed. But although you have different shipping companies, the services are based on alliances. And finally, this shows you basically what's happening with the traffic into India. So initially, that if you go back something like 30 years ago, the number of mainliners, that means the number that were calling directly to Indian ports, were far fewer than feeders, which was a majority of it. So there was a hub and spoke model where cargo would be picked up in India and brought to a hub like Singapore, Dubai, or Sri Lanka, and then put on larger ships. But over a period of time, that share that was 1090 has moved to 3565. So there are more mainline ships calling into Indian ports. So that ends my presentation. And the four panelists, I have given them a certain structure to break up their presentations on. Session one, which will take 10 minutes per speaker, will basically, I have asked them the following questions. Give us the current status quo of the industry. So I've asked them to talk about the nature of products and end user demand, the distribution system, what has happened to demand, explain the nature of your supply chain, what is the status of your domestic operations, are you experiencing delays in receiving payments? Session two, which will be after each speaker has spoken, will be on the recovery stage. And I've asked each speaker to take 5 minutes to talk about how they see the recovery panning out. Is there a new normal? Will there be consolidation in their industry? Will there be a shift in the business model? How are you hoping to exploit the new normal? What are the new opportunities for Sri Lanka? And in what way can the government help? So on that note, I will ask our first speaker, Mr. Ashraf Omar, to give us a presentation on the outlook and the current status quo of his industry.
Thanks, Murtaza. I will, for people who are not within this industry, I will just give a brief profile of what the industry is. In 2019, our exports were $5.2 billion, that is without textiles, pure apparel. And 44% went to the US, 42% to the EU, and 14% to other countries such as China, India, Japan, and other smaller countries. The key products, you brought it up in your presentation. Our key products are, the top product is trousers, both men and women, bras and briefs, t-shirts, shirts, gloves, night dresses, etc. So that's the like the top 7 or 8 products. Our buyers profile is primarily specialty retailers like Victoria's Secret, Gap, and other specialty retailers. Also national brands like Tommy Hilfiger, Nike, Adidas, and wholesalers, large wholesalers and department stores. So, but our country's profile of exporters, buyers is very narrow and deep. Maybe 10 top buyers might be taking about 60% of our product. Now, post-COVID, we have suffered a triple whammy as an industry. The first was when China closed down. You mentioned in your presentation, Murtaza, that 40% comes from there. While Sri Lankan apparel industry has gone into verticality, and today the value add is over 50% of our total export, but still a fair amount comes from the Far East. So when China shut down, a lot of our plants in Sri Lanka.
Ashraf, can I interrupt you? There is a comment from the audience that they can't see you. Is your video on?
My video is on.
Okay. So let's hope that it will.
I can see you though. Let me touch it again and see. I started the video. Maybe.
I can't see him as well, right? Doesn't matter. The second round, we'll try to fix your video, right? Keep going.
Okay, that gives me a chance to do whatever I want to do, right? Anyway, somebody says maybe you have to stop your video. I think you're allowing only one at a time or something like that. Just try.
Doesn't matter. I have switched off my video. You keep going.
Okay, I will try once more. Okay, I'll continue.
Maybe Ashraf,
some tech genius will fix it while I'm going
yes. On. Maybe what you can do is maybe you can do stop video and start video and see whether it works.
I tried that a couple of times.
Okay, doesn't matter. You keep going.
Yeah. Somebody says that it allows only up to 156 participants on video or something. Okay. Anyway, getting back to my explanation. So we, Sri Lankan companies got a triple whammy. The first one was when China closed down. Our factories had to shut down without raw material. Then it went on to, so by the time China opened up, we saw the demand side collapsing because especially Europeans started closing down. And then obviously the US and Sri Lanka. So we, supply side, demand side, and the production side all converged together into a perfect storm. And the industry has come to a standstill. So what's the impact today? Huge impact on working capital. Primarily, you see there was inventory in the form of raw material, finished product, work in progress. Everything has just got stuck there. Buyers on the accounts receivable. Yeah, somebody says now that they can't hear. Murtaza, all of you, can you hear me or?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, so huge impact on working capital. One was all the raw material, work in progress, and finished product has got stuck. Buyers have requested extended payment terms. Some buyers have cancelled existing orders, pushed back purchases for next year. So resulting in a huge cash crunch. Now, when we go on to the next stage, so I think that's the status quo today. So the factories are closed. Some we are working with skeleton staff, either to ship out the goods that were stuck, or making PPE products for the hospitals which are required urgently. We believe that there might be some relaxation depending on how the virus is behaving. So I will talk about that in the next session, Murtaza, because what you want to know is what the impact up to now. So that's the impact at the moment. Standstill. Exports in April will be a minuscule of what it was same time last year. Thanks.
One quick question that I didn't hear too well was, what is the status of your receivables? Are you having delays in payments?
Yes, so you see, most of the, when you say you, I'm talking about the industry, because not as one company, and I can talk about the company too if there's a question. So you see, everybody, moment the buyers have extended their payment period, it has resulted in the factories here requesting for extensions from their own suppliers. So there is an impact, and because everybody is trying to balance cash flow. So if you have no inward remittances, and you have to have the normal expenses of salaries, etc. So there have been delays and requests for extensions from the creditors.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move on to the next speaker, Dilhan Fernando, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ashraf, for that, and thank you, Murtaza. Where tea is concerned, fortunately, I guess the position is a little bit different. You know, there was, as a result of the panic buying last month, there was an unexpected double-digit growth in March sales, and of course, that is going to balance out in April. Generally, people would buy tea with in most territories with a 4-week window, but our issue is possibly much greater related to currency volatility and the fact that price increases in this environment are possibly the last thing that we can implement, because retailers, of course, following consumer sentiment, are becoming much more value conscious. And so in that context, I think that we are seeing, of course, we are expecting that there will be some dollar devaluation. So for companies that are dollar denominated, operating in other territories, I suppose that gives some relief. But generally, where the market conditions are concerned, demand is strong and it's continuing strong. Of course, tea is a very different product to garments. And where we are seeing is that even if you go back to 2008, go back to the upset relating to the millennium and so on to 2000, tea was least affected because as an essential product and as a daily staple, also as a very affordable product, whether the premium segment in tea or the everyday tea, the value segment, it has been least affected amongst food and non-food products. So I think in this case, we have seen buoyancy. Actually, it has been unimaginable, the impact on e-commerce sales, but of course that is to be expected. But the important thing is that we have a new generation, possibly people 60 plus, who are never comfortable with the digital environment, who have come into the market and who are now relying on e-commerce, not only for their safety, which of course in many countries the guideline is that people 60 plus do not venture out, but rather also the fact that they have by circumstance become forced to be comfortable with technology in a way that they never were before. So if you consider the industry from a Sri Lankan perspective, demand really undiminished. And I think our problem is we are operating currently within the health and safety guidelines at approximately 20% of our capacity where packing is concerned, but where our plantations are concerned, we, and I believe most plantation companies, are operating with social distancing and other precautions in place, but operating at around 60%. And the good thing is, where tea is concerned, the good thing is that the rains have changed the drought situation that was threatening us before. And so at the moment, the auction has migrated to an e-auction. It's not a perfect system, but it's workable, and of course it will be improved. So with that e-auction, where I think last week we only transacted some just over 3 million kilos. This week it's a little bit more, but nevertheless the situation should stabilize in the next 2 weeks when we'll get back to 5 million plus auctions. So the key threats where tea is concerned, I think now domestically, is the fact that we have issues with supply chain. So printers unable to get their workers back. There is some of the larger printers have issues. We have print care where people in and around the facilities are complaining to the police, to the health authorities, even if we are complying. I mean, everyone who comes into the printing presses, to the factories, they have the temperature checks, the masks, the social distancing, the hand washing, etc. Yet, of course, there is fear, understandably, amongst villagers in particular, but even in the in and around Colombo, we are seeing this fear that is adding to the pressure on businesses in trying to operate. Where the port operations are concerned, I think they have been okay. Of course, they're to be expected that with the less amount of staff, there has been a little bit of gridlock there. But the key issue is possibly now going to be clarity on the labor law. What is the definition of a holiday? What is the flexibility? What flexibility is there going to be in terms of current laws and the current environment? These are issues that are yet to be debated. But I think from our perspective and from the industry perspective, the people have been the most important criteria, because currently you have, Ashraf, welcome, we can see you now.
Okay, thank you. I had to log out and log in.
Okay, we got you now. So I think the key issue is that, because getting money into the hands of workers has been very difficult. So we are working now with people like Dialog, Mobitel, etc., to use the EasyCash and other platforms, and of course with banks to do the same. But apart from that, I mean, it's possible as a plantation entity to be bringing food and making it available through the estate welfare structure. But of course, there is a wider problem with farmers unable to get their produce out, unable to get money into their hands. So where payments are concerned, absolutely triggered partly by the fact that there has been so much exchange rate impact. Many countries facing devaluation. We have in South America, we have issues. Of course, Australia, it's been a perennial issue, and New Zealand. But if the US dollar cools, I think that situation should change. So summing it all up, demand side, I really don't expect any significant change. However, the slide that Murtaza put up earlier, it demonstrates a fundamental weakness that we have as a country, in that we are too reliant on our traditional markets, Iraq, parts of the Middle East. We are too reliant on bulk tea. We have failed to adequately build our identity differentiation in branding. And those are things that we need to look at now, because in what COVID has done is it's not going to bring new trends, etc. Of course, it will where safety and health are concerned, but it will accelerate the need for Sri Lanka to reassess its policy in relation to tea and its agricultural commodities, value addition primarily. So that's something I believe Prabhash is working on. That's my initial sum up, Murtaza. I hope that's adequate.
Thank you, Dilhan. Before we move on to the next speaker, I just want to inform the audience that there's a lot of questions coming in on both the chat and the Slido. I would recommend that those who are posting on chat to please post on Slido. You go to the Slido website and it's #COVIDLK. Already on Slido, there is 55 questions that have come in, and I recommend that the other participants in the audience vote on some of these questions. So we will take the Q&A after the presentations. Maybe I can ask Prabhash, maybe you would want to put on your camera and give us an overview of the two industries that you are principally in, rubber and seafood.
Well, those are just a cross check. You can hear me well, right?
Yes, we can hear you and see
Okay,
you,
perfect.
and you're looking good.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I have the pleasure to talk about two different industries. So I will talk about seafood first. Predominantly in seafood exports in Sri Lanka, it's mainly the biggest export item is fresh and frozen yellowfin tuna, then followed by shrimp, prawns, crabs, etc. So that's predominant. It's a small sector, just under $300 million in exports. Most of the exports are to the European Union, then to the US, and some to Japan. Most of what we process is value added by factories in Sri Lanka. All the factories are European Union approved. That's why the European Union is a big market for us. Fortunately, I think in this dark scenario in front of us, the seafood business has done, I would say it's a business that would do well going forward. The government declared seafood as an essential service over the last, I think, almost 2 weeks ago. So the factories have been operational, the fishermen have been fishing, so we've been able to get raw material. And the only problem that we've had is mainly in terms of shipping. So most of the seafood is air freighted by plane, and then everything else is shipped by sea containers as cargo. Even though the airport has been closed, surprisingly, there have been still a sufficient amount of cargo planes that have been coming to Sri Lanka. So I would say over the last 2 weeks, the industry holistically has been operating maybe at about a 25% of what we used to operate at, which is a good thing because some industries have been completely closed over the last few weeks. Being essential services certainly helped, and that also gave us the impetus to bring people to our factories. There's a lot of fishermen with a lot of produce, so for us to be able to say that we needed to buy the product, because we've had two issues with COVID. One is, yes, we need to get our factories operational, but two, due to social issues, we also need to be able to get people to come and work at our factories. If I switch to the market, as Europe has been the main market, so we have two areas which are important in the market. One is food service and the other is retail. I think like everybody knows, retail has been extremely strong across the world. You've seen things flying out of shelves. We export in tuna, we export two main categories. One, the fresh, which is more expensive, which is anything between $15 a kilo to $20 a kilo. So it's a little bit niche, but surprisingly, the demand has still been strong for fresh. And even for frozen, which is cheaper, so it's more mass in terms of people, amount of people that would be buying would be more people than who would be affording to buy fresh seafood. And that's at about $6 to $7 a kilo. So the good news is that amongst COVID, the industry has been able to operate and the demand still seems pretty decent, even in a lockdown. I mean, I'd be surprised to tell you that even Italy, we ship. Italy is one of the worst affected markets in Europe, and we still ship. I think as the flights start increasing, things would only get better. In terms of cancellations or payments, yes, most of the companies we work with, this is predominantly a B2B business. So we work with smaller distributors or smaller wholesalers who then will work with the food distribution companies or with the retailers. So Sri Lanka would sell to people like Marks and Spencer, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Whole Foods in the US, but we don't sell it directly. We'll sell it through an intermediary. And those businesses also have been operating. I think people being at home have also been looking at opportunities like I would rather have some good food, and we know Sri Lanka is known for very good tuna, and that's probably one of the reasons why the industry has been active. So just on terms of payments, yes, some companies have asked for a little bit of extra grace, but there have been no discussions about not paying us. There hasn't been any discussions of any cancellations. People in the frozen business, people have said, okay, if there are issues of logistics, we don't mind waiting 2 weeks. But I think if I talk about the seafood business holistically, I think the recovery is going to be earlier, and I think I would anticipate things to be getting better quite soon. We're waiting actually for the curfew to be lifted so things can get into a little bit more normalcy, and with that, I think the industry can come back to some level. Talking about shrimp, there's been an amazing amount of demand for shrimp. Again, that's a frozen product, it's not by air. So as long as the cargo is operational, I think there would be a good demand for shrimp as well. If I can switch to rubber, in terms of rubber, there are 2 categories which are very important. One is tires. I think Murtaza already gave you all a breakdown of the industry. And the second is industrial and surgical gloves. And then the third item is rubber parts. In tires, there are 3 critical items that are important. Material handling, everybody knows. Sri Lanka is the largest manufacturer of solid tires in the world. Besides material handling, number 2 is construction tires. And the third item is agriculture tires. Again, fortunately for the rubber industry, it's been considered an essential service. So most of the factories have been operational for the last 2 weeks. Maybe depending on the factory, anything from 10% to 25% to 40%. There was a strong pent-up demand. So most of the people at the beginning were exporting from stock. And then some of the factories started operations, even with light manufacturing a week ago. Some of the biggest companies in the tire business in Sri Lanka are foreign-owned. Michelin has business in Sri Lanka. Continental has business in Sri Lanka. Trelleborg, which is a Swedish entity, has business in Sri Lanka. So those companies are big enough, the multi-billion-dollar businesses are big enough to manage a crisis like this. Distribution also happens to those companies. So they own their own distributors. They own their own retail stores. So at this time, we're seeing a pent-up demand because factories have just opened up and they're moving goods out. I would say going forward, the material handling sector would follow global logistics. So if global logistics reduce, as we can see, things are reducing, people are not buying as much, things are not moving as much, material handling could have, there could be a possible downtrend. However, with such large stimuluses, like if we talk about the construction industry, governments are putting in a lot of money into the system. So the construction industry is going to do well, which means construction tires will do well. Agriculture tires, which is a new product for Sri Lanka, will do exceptionally well simply because of the demand for food. I mean, food security has become one of the most important topics. So agriculture tires will do extremely well simply because there'll be continuous demand for food. The second item in the rubber business is gloves. Good news is we're sold out for the entire year. We can't supply the demand that's there. So all the factories, their priority right now is to get back into operation. Some of them have been, some of them are getting back into operation. As chair of the EDB, I'm actually asking all exporters to get back into operation as soon as possible. They're sold out for the entire year. Whatever demand that is there, we can't match it. So that's another positive. The other items we export are rubber items such as rubber bands, gaskets, and certain items, things that are related to the automobile sector. I think there would be concerns. Things that are related to entire logistics or for other kinds of items which go into normal production, I think demand would pick up slowly. In terms of payments, I mean, as I said, some of these companies in Sri Lanka are owned by large conglomerates. So there's no real discussion about payments. We haven't seen large cancellations. As I said, order books are still full. We're just trying to keep up with the demand, the pent-up demand that we had because we were not operational. And that's the summary from me on the 2 industries.
Okay, Prabhash, thank you for that. I just had a quick question before we move to Ramesh, was that is your seafood exports highly dependent on air freight?
Yes, very much. But the good news is even though the airport has been closed, the cargo aircrafts have been operating. So that's why we're still able to move seafood through the airport and through cargo aircrafts.
So I was under the impression that most of the air freight cargo from Sri Lanka goes in passenger aircrafts.
It does. So that's why we're operating at about 25%. But even if you take Qatar, Qatar has been operating throughout. Emirates is going to start in 2 weeks. So some of the aircrafts will get into operation over time, and that's been helpful for the air freight business.
Okay, thank you. So over to you, Ramesh, to give us an overview of what's happening in the port, because all these merchandise exports, probably 90% of the volume goes through sea freight.
Thanks, Murtaza. Yeah, very quickly, I think the first thing is that the port has been operating at 100% continuously. So there has been no closure, no stoppage or reduction in capacity from a terminal services perspective across all 3 terminals in the port. Just moving very quickly to the shipping lines, I think to go back to what Ashraf also referred to earlier, the lines have also been faced with literally a perfect storm. This time of the year, traditionally in the first quarter, there is a reduction in capacity anyway on account of the Chinese New Year. That usually ranges to between 6 to 10% of capacity in Q1. But because of the supply shock by the Chinese closure of the Chinese factories, that got exaggerated to the tune of about 20% cut in demand, which in turn had to be replicated. So lines cut 20% of supply in order to make sure that ships were optimally utilized and also, more importantly, freight rates for them, that freight rates were maintained, and to balance the demand and supply. And now with China having opened up and the factories having started, now the demand shock has set in and demand has fallen off a cliff in the primary buying markets. As Murtaza showed in his slide, the primary sea route, 46% is Trans-Pacific, but 40% is Far East Europe, is the Asia trade. And Sri Lanka sits slap bang on the Asia trade, Far East Asia, Europe trade. And so we have both the Far East imports, which come into the region, and also the regional exports, the South Asia exports, which go out to Europe. So from a lines perspective, they are looking, the forecasts that we see are all indicative that over the next 12 weeks, we are going to see a reduction in demand that the lines will correspondingly try and match with reduced supply of anything in the order of 20 to 30% of available capacity or historic capacity. Just numerically, we are seeing some of that indication in the port in Q1 up to the 31st of March. Volumes were largely flat. There was a minor drop, maybe 2% off. In March alone, we had a 5% drop, which was more reflective of a fall in the imports. And then in the first 15 days of April, we've actually had a 20%, 20 plus, almost 23% drop in volumes across the board. So this is for us exacerbated because of the shutdown in India, because about 55 to 60% of our total volumes come from India and Bangladesh, the east coast of India and the southern tip of India and Bangladesh. And we are seeing with those closures, now we are seeing the trickle through both ways. So imports have fallen off as have exports in and out of India and Bangladesh. We are seeing that also reflected now in vessel calls as lines try to balance this demand drop with match the supply by blanking out sailings. And we are seeing how the approximately 20% of sailings getting blanked out on a rolling basis. And I think we are going to see that happening in the months ahead as well. So primarily, I mean, just reading what it appears that if the lines are unable to match this supply in order to keep rates reasonably stable, we are going to, they are looking down the barrel at about a $23 billion loss, which effectively takes away about 8 to 9 years of their earnings in one shot in this year alone. So in order to, I think from looking forward, I think one of the things that we will see is that there will be a certain tightness of space for exporters looking out of here, because the frequency westbound will undoubtedly be tempered somewhat. But I think more importantly, at a local level, what we're seeing is the direct result. Although the ports have been functioning, there's been a big issue with moving goods in and out of the port. This is mainly around transport, mainly around imports. We have typically, the ports have about, between the 3 terminals, have about possibly 12,000 TEU at any given time, 10 to 12,000 TEU at any given time inside the port of imports. And this is now almost tripled at close to 40,000 TEU, which 30 to 40,000 TEU, which has caused massive difficulties inside the terminals in terms of capacity, because you have a slowness in the movement of transshipment on the one hand, whilst volumes are down, but you have these imports sitting here, which is, in reality, the most expensive storage in the world. 2 reasons. One is the transport shock, and the other issue is also a marked reticence on the part of importers to clear cargo, because the minute you clear it, you have costs kicking in, and so partly to offset that, the terminals have all extended free storage for over a month. So there's no container rent, no terminal rent from the 14th of March up to today. In fact, we have had, so clearances are normal and have been normal for some weeks, but it's the outside difficulties that have held it up. On the sort of marginally positive side, we've had some developments in terms of, again, a forced shift to e-commerce, which, although very fledgling, has, it's things that have taken 30 years in the making have happened in 2 weeks, where certain import shipments and export cargoes can now move, or have actually moved, through the port and through customs and through the clearance process with zero physical interface of people, so no documents. It's very, very new, very fledgling steps, but extremely welcome. And I think these are like some of the the Dilan mentioned, the over 60s now being forced into online trading. I think now that we have moved and shown that the trade, that industry and the public and customs and the ports have seen that cargo can move with complete electronic transactions, I think that shift, it's important that we make it inexorable. Going maybe, I think in terms of the current status, that's all. Just to reiterate a few of the things, we are advantaged, given that 80% of our traffic is transshipment. I think the natural advantage that our exporters have in terms of availability of capacity will remain. There is, because of CICT, we have the main loops, the deep water, the deep draft ships coming here. And I think going forward, whilst there will be a drop in capacity or available space, we will, as an exporting nation, I think, slightly better off than some of the hinterland areas in the region. I think that about sums up the current position, Murtaza, unless there's anything specific.
So Ramesh, in fact, I'll just do a quick round with the other panelists on a question that I forgot to take up, was what's happening to pricing in your industry currently?
If I take the terminal industry, obviously the terminals are not making money at this moment in time. And there is massive pressure from our customers, our primary customers who are the shipping lines, to cut prices even further. Now, the transshipment business anyway is highly mobile and so is competitive. So unless we are competitive in a global sense or a regional sense, business will in any case have moved to Malaysia or Singapore or Salalah or any Dubai or any of the regions. So it is a challenge. Customers are now pushing for, because they are faced with having inventory stuck, they're looking for storage options, they're looking for reduced handling rates, and there is a problem there. If I take it, from a shipping line perspective in terms of a freight rates, I think undoubtedly the focus is going to remain of the lines is going to be on maintaining freight rates. I don't think anyone expects, I don't think it is reasonable to have an increase in freight rates. There will be certain areas, I mean, we talked about it earlier, I think things like spot rates are likely to go up, undoubtedly. But none of the lines will be looking at, they'll be looking at maintaining contract rates, and the rate and the way in which to do that will be to cut capacity.
Okay. Dilhan, if I was to go out of order, what's the current status on pricing in your industry?
Well, it's a little early to tell, Murtaza, because all retailers have pulled their promotions after the panic buying. But I think with effect from next week, they'll be back with their normal promotional cycles and so on. But what will happen is, for any unbranded product, there is very likely to be greater pressure on pricing, because all retailers, all brand owners, third-party brand owners are reassessing their costs. It's an unfortunate reaction to this, because actually we are seeing the complete opposite coming from the consumer. So if you look at some of the consumer sentiment data coming out of China, the recovery of consumer optimism has been rapid. I think there was something, the McKinsey report or McKinsey or Nielsen, one of them reported a couple of days ago that recovery has been over 50% in the past week. So the fact is that the consumer will rebound, and in many cases, possibly except some of the non-food items that could be considered commodities, consumers will not become more price sensitive. They will actually become less so, because they are looking for quality and increasingly safety. So thus far, apart from price support that distributors are requesting to offset the currency volatility, we have not experienced any other impact.
Okay. Prabhash, you want to make a comment about pricing, current status of the industry? Yeah.
Sure. So just going back to seafood, strangely, we've been getting a higher price. That's not gone to the processors. As I said before, there's a shortage of demand, shortage of cargo flights going out of Sri Lanka. So the cargo rates have become very expensive. So the rates are almost 300% of what we used to pay before. And that's been passed on to the final buyers, and they've been willing to pay for it. So there seems to be strong elasticity in that. And in terms of rubber, up to now, we've not seen any downward pricing trends, but generally in the rubber industry, for products like what we do out of Sri Lanka, generally the prices become softer as time goes on. Deep recessions, generally the prices go soft. However, at the same time, raw material pricing becomes softer as well. Rubber is mainly prices driven mainly by either with oil, and then synthetic rubber as well as natural rubber, and generally follows oil pricing. So I would think that down the road, pricing would go down as the economy becomes more soft.
Thank you. Ashraf, over to you. Any thoughts on pricing in your industry?
Yeah, at the moment, unfortunately, we are not as lucky as the guys who are selling fish and tea, right? Because this is more of a fashion product. There is immense pressure on pricing, except if you're in the PPE area, that is masks, gowns for hospitals, there is a massive demand for that. But for the normal traditional product, we, in fact, as I mentioned in the beginning, most of the buyers have been asking for discounts. So you can see that there is a big imbalance where the clothing industry is concerned. So there is a huge pressure on price.
Okay,
And in our next session, I will talk on it more.
so on that note, Ashraf, we'll start with you. Why don't we move to the second part, which is the recovery stage? Maybe you can comment on, this demand shock that has come. Has it had a permanent impact on consumer behavior, on the distribution system? And what are your plans to restart production? And what do you think the government should do to help your industry?
Yeah. So if you look at the demand, we believe that there will be a contraction of about 40% for the rest of the year. Now, but 40 will be across the whole year. But if you look at April, May, June, it is much more than that. It's 70, 80%. I think Prabhash can verify the April export figures. It will be very low. So if there is a 40% reduction, now this industry is about a $480 billion export industry worldwide. We have only 1.5% of that. So the biggest player obviously is China. And China is working well. Bangladesh is semi-lockdown. Vietnam and Indonesia are still working. So with once the demand shrinks, then there will be a price war. Now in that war, right, because of the customer relationships, because of the product that you supply, we will be able to retain some amount of product, but it will be at prices which might not be won't be attractive at all. If you can break even, you will be lucky. So that's what we see. Unless, of course, there is a vaccine in the form of a instant cure, right? Then happy days will be there again. But that is, we cannot plan that way. You have to be pragmatic and realistic. So I believe there will be intense pressure on prices because we won't be able to fill capacity. Now that will result in several closures. So we have been advising the government that you will find massive unemployment starting end of April, right? And how do you combat that as a country, as an economy, as a society? There will be issues. And you must remember that with the apparel industry, right, you have factories with 500 workers, you have factories with 5,000 workers, right, located in certain areas. And the trickle effect of suppliers to the clothing industry, those guys are impacted. People who supply transport and food, they are impacted. So you have a whole chain that is getting impacted. And I believe May will be a very rough month for us. June will be tough. And hopefully, if the West opens up and the demand picks up, I think from July, August, maybe September. But we don't see a good situation at least up to September. So it's very, very, very critical where this industry is concerned. And being the largest exporter, it will impact the whole country.
Ashraf, if I was to ask a follow-up question on that you mentioned about pricing, but do you think that the consumer, due to affordability reasons, may shift to other substitute products? So, for example, a significant share of Sri Lanka's exports are these lingerie items. And these are all branded lingerie items. But from a functionality perspective, I'm not a woman, but I would presume that it fulfills the same need. So do you foresee that some of these consumers will shift down to just basic brands?
You see, there are several, you see, first of all, it's about 35-40% of our exports. So 60% still is normal clothing, right? Either sportswear or casual wear. The retailers are worried today that, say, once they open, say maybe in June, will the consumer come and will the consumer try on any clothes because he or she won't know whether it can be infected with a consumer who has come before that or the customer who has come before that. Will they go into a fitting room? After every fit on, will there be a disinfection? So you see, it's a whole, because unless this problem is permanently solved, it will create massive issues on consumer behavior. So we have been talking to several retailers, and they are all they can open, but what will their business be? So that's why the demand, and this is obviously discretionary spending, right? So will they spend more, say, get a better iPad because most of the time they're at home and they are on various digital meetings and all that, or will they buy a new shirt or a trouser? Underwear, okay. Though you say underwear is essential, right? Underwear has now morphed into a fashion product. Otherwise, the brands with the premiums they are charging cannot survive, right? 40, 35 years ago, when you go into a department store, the underwear was in upstairs or in the back of the store. Today, it's in the front. It's showcased right in front, and there are specialty retailers selling only underwear. So now that type of whether that will last or not, I doubt it would. So that's why I'm saying there will be a massive contraction in demand, not only for underwear but across all clothing products.
Okay, so Ashok, what is the plan of the industry to restart production? You said that April and May will be tough periods. And how is the industry handling the large workers? Because there is no clear methodology to make them redundant. So, and furloughs are also legally not permitted. So how is the industry tackling this?
You see, we have been talking to the government regularly. The bigger companies will be able to pay the basic wage for a couple of months more. But the smaller companies have given in writing that they somehow with difficulty paid March wages and they won't be able to pay April wages, right? So that's why I see a huge issue coming up end of April, early May, unless some sort of a injection is given, especially to the small and medium scale sector initially, but to everybody else in the longer term, because nobody can survive without no top line and 70% cost. You see, in the apparel industry, unlike others, out of your total cost, 70% is the people cost, right? Most of the cost is people. Now, you don't have many levers to pull to reduce that unless you go for a salary cut. You might save some amount of money on overtime, incentives, on food, on transport. But other than that, you cannot flex too much, right? So if you're, so from 70, it might come down to 60. And if you don't have operations, obviously that's 100% of your cost. Now, so the runway every company has will be very limited. Now, the small and medium scale have openly in writing declared that their runway is not even 4 weeks. So they cannot pay April salaries. Most of them have declared. Bigger guys will have a couple of months more. But unless something changes significantly, so one change what we are trying to do is to get into other products such as PPE, which is in demand. That's number one. But again, due to the curfew, and government is trying very hard to relax it, but with care, because if you relax and bring in 2,000-3,000 people together, if it starts spreading, then you won't be able to control it at all. So the SOP for operations are very, very strict, that you have to have social distancing. When you transport, there can be one person to a seat, right? So once you do all that, what will be the cost? What will be your output? How many can you accommodate in a particular location? So if you have a box which accommodated, say, 3,000 people, tomorrow it might come down to 1,500. So those are the challenges that we are facing. And the industry talks, we have a session like this every day, and then we link up with various government agencies to see how we can mitigate and soften the blow as much as possible.
Finally, Ashraf, a couple of days ago, the Amazon stock hit an all-time high. They put an announcement they're hiring 75,000 people. I think a similar dynamic played out with Alibaba in China. What's your sense of the e-commerce industry? Are they gaining traction? How are you strategizing with them?
You see, Sri Lanka is supplying most of the e-commerce business at the moment in clothing is still, it's growing, but it's not, still bulk is on brick and mortar. So obviously, everybody will be going down that channel and trying to get as much as possible. But you see, clothing is an impulsive buy. You walk around, you see something, you try it on, you love it, you take it, right? Obviously, everything will change. So while Amazon employed 75,000 people, Macy's alone sent home 150,000 people, right? And if you add every store, right, is sending 50,000, 75,000. So that's why the unemployment has risen drastically over the last few weeks in the United States and in Europe, because they have what you call furlough. You can just pay the medical costs and you don't have to pay the salary. So they very ruthlessly cut the workforce and save cash in order to survive and not to go bankrupt. But I think there will be several bankruptcies, especially in the US because of Chapter 11 protection. I think many companies will go into Chapter 11.
Okay, thank you, Ashraf. If I can move on to Dilhan. Prabhash, I'm going to come to you last because I want you to also speak as the EDB chairman after you comment on the recovery. So over to you, Dilhan, about how the recovery will play out and how you think the consumer will behave going forward and what the government can do to help your industry and also the role e-commerce will play going forward.
Well, where tea is concerned, and I think to an extent where our key agricultural exports, looking at cinnamon, spices, and so on are concerned, I think that demand will rebound. I mean, it's not that it's not there at the moment, it's just that it's difficult getting the logistics and the supply chain factors aligned. But there are going to be some fundamental changes which I anticipate, and I think the most significant threat is the one that I shared based on your data, Murtaza. It's in the fact that we continue to be reliant on traditional Iraq, Turkey, bulk tea, etc. And we need to understand that in this global pandemic, the same pressures that we are seeing and the same pressures that Ashraf just spoke about are on Vietnam, on Indonesia, on Argentina, on other tea producers who are vastly more efficient. I mean, not because we are inefficient, but vastly more efficient for agricultural, soil, and other factors, labor, one third or less than what we have in Sri Lanka. And so cost-wise, they are going to be out in the market and they are going to be very aggressive. And you can see that already happening from Vietnam. Of course, in the US, it's hard to find a Sri Lankan tea, but it's flooded by Argentine tea, significantly wood rather than leaf. I mean, it's all of this is clear. And so as the opportunity is that as the consumer becomes more sensitized to this issue of trust, of safety, and so on, if we could build nationally, I mean, at the moment, we have a few companies that have catered to that through the establishment of laboratories, microbiological, biochemical laboratories, and so on. But if nationally we can strengthen our national quality infrastructure to be able to give a consumer the assurance that tea from Sri Lanka, Ceylon tea, comes with the assurance of ethical, environmental, and food safety, I think then we have an opportunity to establish our uniqueness and take the industry, that is the combination of the plantations and the exporters, forward. But the flip side of that is that in this current environment, many exporters are not geared to it because they have become geared to private label or very economy channels. So in that environment, there isn't much room. There is certainly no margin to be building this kind of quality infrastructure. So my advice at an initial stage is that we need to ensure that in the post-COVID era, that we have two key factors. I think the first one is relevance, and the relevance is going to be to the changing consumer preferences in terms of their demand for wellness, of much greater ethics. If you look at some of the research that's coming through, consumers are saying that they will judge brands based on their conduct at this time. And that means the ethical conduct, and of course, increasingly environmental conduct and so on. So my suggestion is that there is an opportunity, but we should not go back to business as usual, because when you see those charts that you put up, you see that they're significantly unchanged for the past few years. And if you look at Russia, for example, over the past 20 years, the value addition that Sri Lanka has gained, and ultimately you don't bank the number of kilos you sell, you bank the number of dollars or rupees that you make on a product. And therefore, the value addition has diminished vastly. And the prices we sold in Ceylon tea 20 years ago, of course, in real terms, are significantly higher than what we can command now because of this competition and because we have failed to communicate the uniqueness of Ceylon tea. So I think my suggestion is on national quality infrastructure, and we can actually see in terms of China's recovery and the Chinese consumers' demand, the increasingly affluent middle class and so on, demanding quality. They have already, I think most exporters would have had some significant interest from China. The reason is not, it's not some sort of coincidence, but it's the fact that there is this greater demand for quality and a demand for safety and assurance of safety. Impact on pricing, I think the premiumization will continue. It's happened, it's around us. Consumers who have that assurance that the product is good for you, and somebody raised, I think, one of the question here. The fact is that the research demonstrates, this is research from Toklai and Taiwan. Toklai is a research institute in India, demonstrates that theaflavins in tea, not only do they strengthen your immune system generally, but they also enhance they act as a COVID-19 inhibitor. Now, of course, this is based on in vitro and lab tests, and it has to be proven in the human body. But nevertheless, tea has always had lots of good stuff where wellness is concerned, and wellness is one of the top 3 reasons for a consumer to purchase. So as for what the government could do, I believe that in order to make tea, in fact, cinnamon, cashew, we don't have a global Sri Lankan owned cinnamon, pepper or cashew brand, simply because we are supplying to the big boys who have no interest in our workers or the welfare of our industry, but rather make the most of it, as of course that's normal for a trader. And so my request of the government is, let's build this national quality infrastructure. We have the requirements, let's build the standards, but let's make them domestic standards that are accessible to the smallholder. So where if I am a tea grower with 4 hectares, I should be able to go and say, look, I want to get that standard and I want to be able to sell my product overseas. I don't need to sell to Dilma or whoever it is, but I need to be, that's the way we can really move, really deliver some benefit at a national scale, because we've got to focus on the rural economy. And if you look at this, the situation currently, I think that in supporting that rural economy, the smallholders is how we are going to, as a nation, come out of this, because we have to remember, after COVID, we are still going to face global warming. We are still going to face the problems of inequality and so on. And if we empower the farmer, and if we strengthen the rural economy by enabling and empowering them, we have the possibility to take Sri Lanka to a next stage and use these people who are the front line of both. If you look at the environment, I mean, yes, we can go to our institutes and research and we can shout from the rooftops, but ultimately it is the farmer, the agriculturalist, who is going to do most to impact on amphibians, on frontline species, and so on. So I would conclude by proposing that we as in the case of companies, we work towards building a national business continuity plan that would not only prepare us for future versions of COVID, because I think that's a reality. Okay, it's Ebola or COVID-19. Who knows whether COVID-20 or 21 will be around the corner. But nevertheless, the fact that volatility and disasters are going to be a part of our lives, that's something that was predicted a long time ago. So my suggestion is, let's support our agriculturalists, let's help them to add value and demonstrate their uniqueness, because they have the uniqueness. Sri Lanka has the uniqueness. Let's try to stand apart from Vietnam and our other competitors rather than joining them, but also let's build a national business continuity plan that's going to help us, because this is going to happen again, maybe in a different scale. I pray it'll be at a different scale, but it will happen. I hope that covered the questions you had.
Dilhan very passionately articulated. Maybe you can very quickly touch on e-commerce and whether your distribution and retailing system will change going forward.
E-commerce has gone into hyperdrive, but I think that where the future is concerned, it will continue at this level, mostly with non-food. But where food is concerned, it seems, I mean, judging by what we have seen in previous crises, I'm sure that it will tail off where tea, cashew, and so on are concerned, because typically, particularly in the premium segment, assuming that we build our national proposition around premium products, I mean, as we do as a business, people need to touch and feel, and they need to engage with the brand at a different level. So of course, there are technologies, there will be significant increase. I mean, I'm talking about double-digit increase that we are seeing on our own platforms, forgetting about Amazon and Etsy and so on. Those simply add to that. But I think that e-commerce will continue in hyperdrive, but I think where food is concerned, we're going to have to gear ourselves to establish that uniqueness, because today a customer coming on, I mean, if you go to the Kroger website or Woolworths website, you look up tea and you see, you're going to see 10 years ago, it was 5 brands. Today, it's 25 brands, and that will increase. And so in that process, I think that the e-commerce opportunity is tangible. It's there, it's growing, but we need to build an omni-channel strategy. We need to make sure that we are strong in the cafes, restaurants, that we build engagement and trial in that way. Of course, hospitality is an area that I didn't touch on. That's gone pear-shaped. It's looking horrible at the moment. But I think that that is a momentary thing. You know, we always predict and look at dire statistics and think that it will change everything. But I think ultimately the consumer is quite resilient. And I think looking at some of the stuff coming out of China now, I believe that the consumer will go back to a semblance of normalcy. But what this quarantine has shown us is the difference between what we need and what we want. And I think that will fundamentally influence consumer behavior. I'm sure in each of your cases, we've sort of all of a sudden realized that we actually don't need a whole lot of stuff to keep our lives and our families continuing. So I think in that sense, yes, I think consumer behavior has fundamentally changed, but the question is how we respond to this new post-COVID era. I hope that answered your question, Murtaza.
Thank you, Dilhan. Yes, you did. Over to you, Romesh. How do you see the recovery happening for your sector, and what are the opportunities that Sri Lanka can explore? You need to unmute, Romesh. You need to unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, for the port sector, we were at a bit of a burning platform here, because after 5-6 years of double-digit growth and growing at faster than the rate of container growth anywhere else in the world, we began to plateau because of a lack of capacity. So we did about 7.2 million TEUs of containers last year, and the port was approaching 80-85% of its capacity. Now, at those levels, what would have happened is what was inevitable, and we saw that in the year-on-year growth last year was only about 3.5% against double-digit growth in the previous 3 years or 4 years. we would have had business moving away from Colombo. Transshipment business will move to where capacity exists. So in a sort of backhanded kind of way, the drop creates opportunity for Colombo because we will be able to retain all the business that traditionally came through here and with no difficulty. But more importantly, also be able to cater to what will undoubtedly become new business as shipping lines go back to more basic hubbing and the hub and spoke model because their priority will be to fill the big ultra large container ships. Now these, costing close to $250 million each, around $200 million, they cannot operate suboptimally with 50, 60, 70% utilization. They've got to be full, which means that, going back to your slide, I know it may, this is again a hypothesis, but a lot of those direct services that cater to niches from locations in India, locations in Southeast Asia, all of those will end up becoming hubbed over key ports like Singapore, like in Malaysia, like in Sri Lanka and Colombo. And we will see, and I think we are very likely to see the induction of additional deep draft big services, mainline for Asia-Europe services into Colombo. So I think that with that, we will have the same recovery curve that Ashraf talked about. I think we are going to see the next 12 weeks as being quite challenging. We think also that by June, India will start to, production will start more aggressively. Their imports and their exports will start. Bangladesh may be a little bit before that. But we see that as an opportunity and now we see, this as a bit of a respite for Colombo in terms of, one is making sure that we hold on to the existing business that we have, and also a growth opportunity. It also gives us gives the government a slightly window to actually get cracking in terms of developing the East Container Terminal. Now, we have procrastinated on that for 6 years. 6 years. It should have been ready by and up and operating by 2016, 2015. For 5 years, we did nothing. 6 years, we did nothing. And now it really needs to be put on roller skates, because in the end, the business that we are in is supply-led. It is demand will only follow supply, and we have to have supply available for the lines to look at using Sri Lanka. That's on that side. On the domestic side, I think one of the great wins that we can make, that we have to make use of, is push the agenda of electronic clearance of cargo in both directions. That is an absolute priority, both in terms of efficiency to the exporters and the importers, but also in improving our ranking on the ease of doing, World Bank's ease of doing business rating. Border controls and logistics were one of the clear levers that dragged us down. And I think that again is an opportunity. And I think as a trade, both the export-import trade as well as the logistics and transportation, international transportation trade, will have to work very closely with the government to make sure that this gets cemented in and becomes the norm. Yep.
Thank you, Romesh. Over to you, Prabhash. You may want to comment about the recovery of those two industries, and then also generally talk about what you as the EDP chairman and the EDP is planning to do to help the export sector.
Okay, sure. So let me start with the rubber industry. Generally, as I said before, when there's a deep recession, which the world is going to go into, and that's a hard fact, the rubber industry does slow down. When we look at the three components of the rubber industry, we take the tire sector, the construction tires, because of all the stimulus and the money flowing into different companies in different countries, mainly in US and Europe, I think that sector would do well. Material handling would slow down. Material handling will only pick up once global logistics take off. And on agri tires, simply due to food security, I think there'll be a huge demand for agri, so agri tires would do well. Rubber gloves, as I said, medical gloves, there's such a huge demand, not only for the gloves business, but also for face masks. Ashraf was talking about PPE. I mean, we have more demand than what Sri Lanka can cater for. In terms of supply and issues in supply going forward, I think China has been coming back to normal, so the rubber industry can operate. India is a concern now that the ban in India has been, it's another 2 weeks. But supply chain would get normalized over a period of time. And if I talk about things like consolidation, as I said, most of the largest tire companies in Sri Lanka are owned by the big boys in the industry. And there wouldn't be consolidation at that level, but probably for smaller companies, there would be potential opportunities of consolidation within the sector. In terms of new opportunities, the tire industry is a $250 billion global industry. We export just under $600 million from Sri Lanka. I think the geographical shift is going to play a huge part in the tire industry. Most of you would have seen Japan officially announced that they're going to start paying companies to leave China and to move their manufacturing. I think that's really a very strong point for the tire industry and also for the export sector holistically. I will touch upon that later on. But there are opportunities of that nature. In terms of shift to e-commerce, as I said, it's mostly a B2B business. So I don't see a very large shift simply because there is a service component which needs to be managed as well. Going into the seafood industry, I would say the recovery is moderate to strong. As we discussed before, most of our seafood exports are sent by air, so we're limited by the number of flights that are operating. That would only start picking up once we have more flights operating, unless we are able to increase the number of cargo flights. And that will also get better only with the European economy opening up, the US economy opening up. So it would be moderate to strong in terms of recovery. In terms of opportunities, I think the shift would be from fresh seafood to frozen seafood from Sri Lanka. So moving from a $20 kilo product to about a $6 to $7 kilo product. There are several factories in Sri Lanka which are already geared and doing frozen products. I think that's a shift that I would see in the seafood industry. Opportunities in the seafood industry, I would say historically our markets, as we discussed before, has been the US, Europe, and Japan mainly. But I think markets which are closer to us now become important. Take Dubai, for example, take the Middle East, take Singapore, take Malaysia. Those could become important for us because, again, food and demand has been quite strong in this area. I don't know if people know or not, but the Lulu supermarket in the UAE has been sending their own planes to pick product from Sri Lanka. They've been operating a plane 2 times a week to pick product from Sri Lanka. So we've got new opportunities opening like that. And the shift would be to frozen products, and the shift would be to frozen tuna as well as to frozen shrimp. You want me to go on to EDB?
Yes, Prabhash. I mean, there are some questions also coming in. Some of the questions that are asked is that there is a large supply chain, and although curfew permits have been given to factories, the suppliers don't have it.
So, okay, I'll take that question straight up. So EDB and the BOI has been given responsibility to open up the entire export sector. This happened over a gradual period of time. I think people need to be a little bit realistic in their understanding. We, as a country, we were managing a health crisis first. So second, we were looking at on how to get the economy moving. So our number one priority was managing the health crisis. That's what the government did, and I think they've done a fantastic job. Anybody can look at the statistics and see what's going on all over the world. So in opening the economy, as I said, I know many companies who've been operating for 3 weeks. I know many companies who've been operating for 2 weeks. I know, and last week I came online and I said, we need to get the export sector moving post New Year. So the EDB and BOI is able to facilitate to open factories. Yes, there are 2 concerns. One concern is the red zones. We talk about Colombo or Gampaha. So there are more control in those areas. So there are more restrictions, but we've still got factories operational in these 2 areas. The other is inter-district movement. As long as the inter-district movement is nearby districts, they're being quite flexible, but we've got many factories operational. So that's to answer your question.
And any specific initiatives that the EDB is hoping to roll out to help exporters?
before I take that question, maybe just let me backtrack for a second, right? When I look at total exports in Sri Lanka, I had an ambitious plan 6 weeks ago of $18.5 billion in exports. That was 6 weeks ago. COVID happened, we are where we are. When I talk about a recovery, again, I think we need to be pretty realistic in terms of a recovery. We're not going to be able to find a miracle. This is a long-term game. We need to start thinking about running a marathon and not a race. So I would be looking at a minimum of 18 months for us to come to some level of normalcy. The EDB, we've reduced export target. 18.5 billion was from merchandise as well as service exports. We've reduced it to $10.75 billion. That's a sharp reduction. Just in merchandise exports, we've reduced it from 13.5 billion to $7.5 billion. So the reality is that we are not going to have the business we had yesterday. That's a reality. We just need to understand that and get on with the program. If we look at two areas, sectors that would do well, sectors that would be challenging. I think Ashraf has been telling us all the challenges he's been facing. So apparel for sure would be a sector that's challenging. A big concern because it's a large part of our merchandise exports. Things like diamonds, gem, and jewelry would also be a concern in terms of how challenging it is. People are not going and buying luxury goods. People are not going to stores. They'll not be buying stuff like this. Electronics and electrical components would also be a sector which would be challenging. But on the flip side, let's look at the sectors in Sri Lanka that could do well. Take food and agriculture. For me, food and agriculture is going to do exceptionally well. You heard from me about seafood. What about spices? What about fruit and vegetables? What about coconut? And what about processed foods? So there are a lot of sectors that would do well. It could even do better than what it was. So to answer your question in terms of what the EDB can do, I'm looking at three areas. So my strategic plan effectively has crashed. I had a fantastic plan for this year about diversifying my export base and looking at new export items, etc. We're now updating our strategic plan. So it's threefold: short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Short-term plan is get everybody back into business, understanding the new norm. People need to understand this. There is a new norm. We won't be able to live the way we used to live. We won't be able to operate the way we used to live. So we've got to stop crying about it and find pragmatic solutions and get on with it. So short-term is to get business back in operation. The good news on that is, I mean, we've been able to be quite strong in the government by supporting people, and they've also been relaxing rules and regulations for us to be able to open. 2 weeks ago, I, as the EDB chairman, was struggling to get factories open. Now I have a dedicated officer from the senior DIG who can get any factory open for me. I have a dedicated officer from the Ministry of Health who can get any factory open. So short term, we want to get people back in business in whatever possible manner. I understand, as I said, two buckets. There are people who've got business, people who've got stock. Let's start exports and get those things moving. People who might not have business, then we need to look for opportunities. Medium term, help exporters to identify how the new norm looks like, what the new opportunities are. There are a lot of new opportunities. As I said before, there's more demand than supply in terms of gloves. There's more demand than supply in terms of PPE. We have certain issues that we need to resolve that the garment sector might need to look at reorganizing themselves to meet that kind of demand. Long term, I think our export industry needs a structural change. We've been over-reliant on our historical exports, apparel plus agriculture. I think that's a structural change that is needed. I think, take things like Thailand or Vietnam. Thailand used to export rice 25 years ago. They still export rice today. But the percentage in the export of rice 25 years ago was much greater than what it is today. They moved beyond to other products. So Sri Lanka needs to redefine itself in our export basket, and we should be looking at new products. I'll give you one example. I mean, with all these issues in terms of medical stuff, take pharma. We're not doing anything in exports of pharma. Pharma could be a very big area for Sri Lanka, which could be valid for now or not. I also agree with Dylan saying, even after 18 months, I mean, as I said before, I look at the virus and there are only two fixes for the virus. One is a medicine. It's not a proper fix, but it's a short-term fix. The other is a vaccine, which is minimum 18 months away. However, there could be other issues that could come down, even if we're able to deal with COVID. But I think structurally, Sri Lanka needs to change the export base. We can't hear you, Murtaza. You're on mute.
Sorry. I'm sorry, I'm going to reiterate that one question that came on Slido because we're going into the Q&A next. To the EDB chair from Jay. We are ready to export, cannot do because supporting industries aren't allowed. Packaging producers, barcode printers. Can the government allow these?
We have a help desk. Please call us. We'll help you in whatever way we can.
Right.
Our officers have been working on New Year, yesterday, day before. We'll help you in whatever way we can.
And that number is on your website. The help
Yes.
desk number?
Yes.
Right, okay. So we will now move to the last part of this discussion, which is the Q&A. And I would like to apologize to the audience that I may not be able to take all the questions because basically I'm flooded with a large number of questions. On the Slido platform, I think there is almost over 100 questions and there have been a lot of ones that have come on the chat. So let's go to Slido because there is a way of voting on them. So the first question is Hansini Mahanama to Mr. Ashraf Omar. What are the solutions or future plans that you have discussed to overcome this negative impact on the Sri Lankan export apparel industry? I think you covered it partly, Ashraf, but is there any specific thing you would want to reiterate again?
Yes, you see, Prabhash hit the nail right on the head when he said that he has brought the export target to 7 billion from 13 billion, right? Because up to now, I was sounding only the prophet of doom and everybody, I was getting the impression that it's gung-ho. Now, those numbers show that we are in deep water, right? So we are confident as an apparel industry. When the quotas went away, everybody, all the top economists at that time said that we will vanish. We doubled or tripled our exports. So we will come back. But I just want to make sure everybody has to understand, public has to understand that we will go through a tough period over the next 6 months to 9 months. And looking at Prabhash's numbers, right? It means a lot of money the country needs badly won't be there. So we will have to come with alternatives. So coming back to the question, we will rise, we will be stronger, which we have been, but it will take time. And in the short term, it won't be a walk in the park unless something happens and things return to normal much faster. We will have to go through that tough patch. And what I'm trying to get everybody to realize that not that we will die, we will come back, but it will be a long, tough journey. So we cannot leave this session thinking that, okay, tires will sell and something else will sell and we'll be okay. No, apparel is almost half the country's export. We will have to restructure, but restructure means grow other areas and keep on growing apparel. Germany, I'm looking at my chart, is the 4th largest exporter of apparel even today, right? So they have not killed that industry, but grown the others. So we will have to work together with the government, with everybody else to come out of it. But I cannot give a good news. I'm just talking about the next 6 to 8 months because that's what will impact. Next month will be tough. The month after might be tougher. Get prepared for that and then have another plan. And the industry is working on plans what the next growth would be. And we will do that.
Thank you, Ashraf. I will throw this question to you, Prabhash, and maybe the others also may want to comment. This is about imports that are necessary for export. So it's from Nuan Jasing and 22 votes on that question. Recently, government banned all imports. How does this affect our exports? My understanding is you source a lot of material as import.
Fantastic question. So the EDB has been given authority to authorize any import that is required for any exporter in Sri Lanka. We were informed about this yesterday evening, and we're going to roll out a program on how that's going to happen. So we will give approval for anybody to import anything as far as it's related to exports. So that's very clear.
So Prabhash, let me clarify that. Now, I was made to understand that there will only be a negative list. But are you saying that all imports are banned unless there's an exception given to it?
No, there were only 2 documents that were released in terms of banning, and that's publicly available in terms of the items that were banned. So
Right.
originally it was on vehicles and stuff like that. Then there was a second document. However, specifically regarding exporters, now if there are any special items either in those lists or if there are any new lists that they're thinking of coming up with, we've got blanket authority that we can authorize anybody to import anything as far as it's for exports. So we're going to be announcing, this is new, it's hot off the press. I was only told last evening, so we'll be rolling it out soon.
So the current status quo is that the banks are not permitted to open any LCs.
I think as far as the two lists which are published in terms of items which are specifically banned, it's through the customs, Ministry of Finance, Central Bank, and the banking system that you can't import those items.
Okay. All right. So this is again, I think to you, Prabhash, it's from an anonymous person. We've got a government circular informing relevant departments to facilitate export industries in coconut tea, rubber, but local police departments seem informed. So you, I believe, said that you have a DIG and whoever posted
Yes.
this, call your helpline.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I said. People need to understand the situation in hand. The government was managing the health crisis, and then they moved on slowly. Of course, in a dynamic situation like this, where things are changing on a daily basis, things have not been very black and white. But the BOI and EDB can help all the companies in those related fields to restart their business,
Okay.
provided it's outside the red zones or any area where specifically it's cordoned off.
Okay. The next question again is from an anonymous poster with 17 votes. I will throw that to Ashraf. How transferable are skills equipment in factories? Is it possible, for example, to shift to produce medical supplies, masks, gloves, eyewear?
Yeah, already many companies have started supplying, but the problem is the raw material, and raw material still comes from China. Now, we have got a couple of our fabric units to come up with product, and obviously, we have already got export orders with the fabrics that will be made in Sri Lanka. So while it's not very easy, it's not impossible, and that's what we will do in order to survive. So I think the next few months, most companies here would be doing all PPE products and then go into fashion as and when it picks up.
Okay. Prabhash, you have any comments about pivoting the activities in some of the factories to do these items?
I mean, in terms of labor pivot is different to technology pivot. So in some of the products that we need to make, maybe we need to understand what the technology is. So, I mean, some of the foreign governments even have been saying, can we get some of the urgent needed items? And my question to them was, can you support us on the technology side as well upfront, so we don't have any problems and we don't have to reconfigure something new? So yes, we need to be innovative, and that's across the board in all our industries. We have a crisis of this nature or not. We need to be able to be agile. We need to be able to be innovative.
Okay. The next question is from Sunimali Dash from the Sunday Times. Actually, she's asked two questions. I'll take the first one. What is the impact on the workforce in terms of layoffs expected? I think, Ashraf, you covered this partly, but would you like to reiterate that again?
We expect 30 to 40% of the factories not being able to open. So they are, but that's on the demand side. But the bigger problem, like I said earlier, is the cash flow. The small and the medium sector has categorically stated that they cannot pay April salaries. So there is, by law, you cannot fire unless you go through a termination process, right? But will there be liquidations, or will there be bankruptcies? Will there be? There are some companies who have openly put out statements saying that they won't pay salaries from April onwards. So that is reality. Now, in order to and the government is working very hard. We have been talking to the highest level, and they are trying to come up with some assistance to that sector so that there won't be mass scale hunger, right? There won't be, people will have to get paid either from the factories that close or from Samurdhi or from the government. So I think that's the status. So I wouldn't just pick a number and blow it out of proportion, but it will be tough. That's all I can say.
You said 30 to 40% of factories. That doesn't mean 30 to 40% of the apparel labor force, right?
Yeah, you see, we have 350,000. If you take 30%, it will be, say, 120,000. So there will be definitely, in my view, you see, if they belong to the bigger units, even if they don't work, they will get paid something. But if they are with the smaller units, there will be, they won't get paid. So that has to be looked into, and we are working with the government to somehow address that before the month is out.
So when you say that the basic salaries will be paid from the total remuneration, where I believe there is a significant overtime component, the basic salary which is being paid from the larger units, what percentage is that of the total remuneration, normal remuneration?
Yeah, so you see, if you, it will be about 25 to 30%. So it's significant.
They will lose.
Yeah, because overtime incentives, they will lose. Attendance allowances.
Okay. All right. Okay, so the next question, I think, Prabhash, you have already answered it from Darshan about what new opportunities, which you have elaborated on. Right. Then there's another question on whether export companies will benefit from bank moratorium, which taxpayers will have to bear. Prabhash, is there any kind of moratorium specifically targeted for export companies?
No, the moratorium that was issued for all companies of 50 billion rupees, everybody can qualify, but the taxpayers don't really bear that because it's not a write-off, it's a loan that you're taking which you've got to pay back subsequently. So there's no free money given by anybody.
I think I'll throw to Dilhan. It's about tea plantation workers, whether they are at the moment working. What's going on in the plantations? I'm presuming the tea bushes are growing.
Yes, absolutely, they are, Murtaza, and the work stopped over the Aurudu for 2 days, 3 days, and they have work has resumed today with the distancing and other guidelines in place. But where incomes are concerned, I saw that question. I think the person's concern was on the workers' incomes. Actually, there is no impact because the plantations have been continuing all throughout. But I guess on the plantation companies there is, because there has been this special arrangements both for supply of food. So we've had to bring in trucks of vegetables and rice, etc., to make sure that there is no serious situation on the estates. But yeah, where the incomes are concerned, no significant impact.
Prabhash, this
Murtaza, can I just add to something?
Yes.
I think that's something important about labor. I think with people, as I said, people need to understand we're dealing with a national crisis and a global crisis, which nobody in the world has ever faced. This is worse than any world war. We are dealing with something which has impacted every single country on the planet, every single human on the planet. Okay, so in a situation like this, when you talk about salaries, I think people need to understand that if you can keep your job and you are able to have something with you, that's a plus point. When we revise our export earnings from $18.7 billion to $10 billion, that's $7 billion missing for our current account of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has not had a budget, never had a budget positive. We've had a budget deficit. So there is going to be austerity measures for all of us, everybody on this call, and we need to be able to go through that. So just to talk a little bit more on the salary issue, the government understands that, and I think the government is looking at it proactively to see how we can help people. The reality is it's going to be tough, and we need to be able to face it, and that's the truth.
Okay, the next question is actually, I'm combining two questions that have come in. It's about whether there is a case for improved economic diplomacy and whether Sri Lanka can pursue some of these FTAs to bring dynamism back into our export sector. Prabhash, would you like to take that? And maybe I'll ask Ashraf because previously you were in this agency for international trade.
Okay, so I have been a strong proponent of FTAs. The only way for us to have an edge in terms of export trade is by having FTAs. I think it's a perfect opportunity for us to go after the China FTA. I know a lot of local industries will get really annoyed with me for saying this, but I think we are in a position of strength. Sri Lanka is very close to China. That's a reality. We should be able to negotiate that FTA where it's beneficial for Sri Lanka. So I'm a very strong proponent of FTAs. I think we need to look at FTAs. We need strong FTAs, not only with China, we should even look at the ASEAN region. That's the only way for us to build our export base. Ashraf, would you like to take over from that?
Yeah, thanks, Prabhash. Now, I see another opportunity here because if you look at the terms of trade enjoyed by the LDCs, right? They are now today, though Bangladesh has more money, they are an LDC. Maldives has definitely, they are doing much better than us, but their currency is much stronger than us, but they are also an LDC. So what I believe is that this is the time to apply for, not that because we are a middle income country, but we will need at least a 3-year period to recover. So we should immediately, right, ask all the world WTO and others to try and give us the same status for 3 years as LDC so that we become duty free almost to many countries in clothing except to the United States. You enjoy duty free benefits and market access. So that's one thing that can be done immediately. I am also a fan of FTAs, but FTAs are a very emotional subject in Sri Lanka, right? So while we start negotiating FTAs, I think this is a avenue that we must really pursue, because if we get that a 3-year window within which we can get better market access, I think that will help boost, get us onto our feet much faster. And Prabhash, you said about unemployment is inevitable, and that's why I'm facing the topic head on, because last week I think there were 3 million Americans who applied for unemployment, right? So nobody in the world will get away from this, right? So that's why we have to face it, prepare for it, prepare the people for it, and then come out of it.
Okay, couple of last topics I would like to explore. There's a lot of questions that have come, but some of them are repetitive and I may not be able to cover all the questions that have been asked. The first is, it seems like there's a major geopolitical battle going on between America and China. And I recently read in the Nikkei that the Japanese government is paying that companies who have located in China to relocate to other destinations. What do you think will happen to global supply chains which are highly reliant on China? Do you see some level of regionalization or nearshoring? And that, in what way can Sri Lanka exploit that? Ashraf, would you like to start first?
Yeah. You see, we have the new free trade zone coming up in Hambantota. Our relationship with China is great, with India it's great, and with Japan it's great. So I think this is the time to leverage that, right? We will be able to quickly bring in different types of industry into that area. And there should be, we have already suggested that, so there should be a separate team working on it to be the first country to be able to attract. Because you see, while they will move out of China, you must remember that some of these products cannot be made by anybody who just has a little money. You see, it needs tacit knowledge of the product. It needs a lot of expertise. It needs a huge amount of knowledge to quickly ramp up that production. So it will be better to invite Chinese companies in collaboration with Japanese companies to come to Sri Lanka and get off the to exploit this as fast as we can. After that, you can have other companies coming in, but this will be the fastest move. Now, say Foxconn is everywhere. We don't have Foxconn in Sri Lanka, right? So Foxconn is a big supplier to Apple, but they are in India already. So why cannot they be in Hambantota? So I think those are the avenues, and say imagine making iPhones in Sri Lanka or some other electronic device. So there is that window of opportunity. I think while we are in a crisis, we have a sweet spot to leverage, and we must do that by putting together another team which will chase that.
Prabhash, do you have any views on this regionalization trend and reducing reliance on China?
Yes, I mean, I think I brought up Japan as well before. I think it's something that we absolutely need to exploit as an advantage for Sri Lanka. One, in terms of the way we manage this crisis, we did better than most countries all over the world. That's a position of strength for Sri Lanka. Two, in terms of our location and our logistics, we have very strong logistics pretty much all over the world. We can ship to Europe in 12 days. We can ship to the US East Coast in 28 days, to the West Coast in 22 days. So we have a very strong point. And I think more than factories becoming closer to their individual countries, today, the real shift is out of China and within the region. I think that's exactly what we need to exploit.
Okay. Dilhan, do you have any comments to make on this topic?
Yes, absolutely. Because after COVID-19 hit China, we went through this whole process. And I think that what we learned from that was that as we seek to take advantage of this new trend, which I think is going to be a safety strategy or supply sort of protection strategy of most countries, we should not look solely to replacing or substitution of certain materials. I can give you an example that caught us off guard, which is if you look at China is one of the largest producers of consumer tin caddies, which is essential for most tea and spice and other products, similarly very large in glass. So whilst China is the producer, when you go to other countries, so we went for tin caddies to the Middle East, to India, etc., to Thailand, most of them are reliant on China for supply of their raw materials. So the solution was actually in innovating different materials. So in this case, looking at compostable caddies that were based on composite paper and so on. So I think the important thing is not to look to substitute, but also taking the trends of what's happening in the world in relation to the environment and compostability and all these things, to look at how we can redefine packaging. And we have the talent. If you look at some of the minds, some of the brains in Slintech and different parts of the country, it's just we need to be able to merge academia, government and businesses to be able to come together and match what is available and reimagine. And I think you'd be surprised, because what we found was the local capability in terms of science, imagination. I think Ashraf and Prabhash know very well about the competence that we have in our universities. I think that is something that is critical that we unlock as we look to building our food security and other strategies post-COVID.
Ramesh, do you have any comment about this regionalization?
Yes, again, to add to what Prabhash said, logistics is a core capability for us here, given the location. And the regional FTAs have all, they're a bit of a cliched discussion, but the reality is that we have good political relations, not only with the Chinese, but also with the huge South Asia, with the South Asian region, which are big producers as well. So Sri Lanka offers a value proposition from a logistics perspective, not only for relocation of Chinese industry, but for cooperation between regional industries, that is with Indian businesses, Bangladeshi businesses also, relocating here in order to augment their own offering. So that is something definitely that, that is a latent value that we've had. And certainly this is as good a time as any in order to leverage on that. And the way to do that is obviously with industry on the one hand, diversity of that industry, but also with the big transportation and logistics players. Sadly, none of whom are here, in person. So that's a whole different discussion, but there are reasons for that as well. And those I think need to be addressed as well.
There was also a question that came in, Ramesh, that you may want to take. That was with reference to Hambantota, and Ashraf also mentioned about an industrial zone coming up in Hambantota at a future date. Would you have any sense of what is the current status quo with China Merchant Holdings operations in Hambantota?
I think there are, one is it's a humongous opportunity because, not holding a candle to China Merchant, but the reality of what they have done with a place like Shekou in Shenzhen is mind-blowing over a period of 10 years, how they have built around a port, a zone and an industrial zone into something that is an absolute powerhouse in southern China. Now, we have all the attributes in Hambantota for that. We have the port, we have an airport, which if we need to do it, we now have what was critically missing, road, seamless road linkage, and very soon rail linkage. So the whole inland logistics piece of between a zone in Hambantota and the Western Province, which is not only consumption, but also will probably remain the main outlet for container traffic in the foreseeable future. Because whilst I'm sure China Merchants would like to convert that into a container port as quickly as possible, that is probably a little further down the road. But as you showed right at the beginning, in the end, containers represent maybe 16 to 18% of global shipping trade. The reality is there is a whole raft of industry that has got nothing to do with container transportation. And that can be, located, some of which can be located in Hambantota. Singapore grew on the back of its petroleum and petrochemical businesses. There is nothing to stop us. We are in a regional sweet spot, geographically between the Middle East and the huge Southeast Asia and South Asian consumption market for things like petrochemicals. So, and everything that comes off it. So I think Hambantota, it is in the hands of a private company now, but that should not deter the government from really bringing everything possible to bear to bring the zone up and running as quickly as possible.
Ramesh, there was also one question. It's about air cargo demurrage. But generally, what is the situation on demurrage? I mean, all these containers are piling up in the port. What is the stance that the terminals have taken in terms of charge?
So I think there are two aspects to demurrage that need to be clear. There is what is known as the port rent, which is the rents paid to the terminal on import boxes that sit beyond the 3 free day storage. So the terminals have all agreed to waive storage charges from the 16th of March, which is the first holiday that was declared, up to the 14th of April. And in fact, that the free storage will, the normal 3 days free storage will start on the 14th of April. So they will end today. So anything cleared up to today that arrived after the 16th of March is completely free of rent. From tomorrow onwards, rent will begin to apply from what is the first working day, which was the 14th. So not back from 16th of March, but rent will apply from the 14th of April onwards. So again, there is now really no barrier within the port or the customs system as far as clearance goes. So it is really the only barriers that are retarding clearance are the importers themselves, their ability, willingness, and desire to clear, and nothing within the system. There's nothing stopping people from clearing cargo, both less than container loads as well as full containers.
So my understanding is the way LCs work. I mean, if you're an importer, it's in your interest to try to delay as much as possible because the payment only goes when you clear.
That is right, but from tomorrow onwards, that becomes a real double-edged sword, because then the importer is going to be paying not only whatever, when he does clear his LC charges and import charges, but also port rent. And on top of that, the other element of rent or demurrage that I talked about, which is what the shipping lines impose on holding onto their inventory, onto their box. So again, many shipping lines have waived or are waiving on a case-by-case basis rents incurred on account of the container.
Okay, thank you, Ramesh. I think we need to end this session. Maybe an opportunity for any of the panelists who would like to ask questions from any of the other panelists.
Maybe I might throw something in there, Murtaza, to ask Prabhash, as we look to, of course, harnessing the FTAs, but also looking to post-COVID recovery. Perhaps this is more a statement, but I hope that we could work together, Prabhash, in building that synergy and that nexus amongst academia and business facilitated by the EDB, so that we can work on that innovation piece, which is going to be so important for us to add value to Sri Lankan produce.
Well, one thing His Excellency has done is put private sector people into government. So I come from your same side. I'm happy to work with everybody.
I have a solution for Dilhan. You see, the private sector has invested in Slintech, and we are hunting for other private sector guys to come in, especially guys with deep pockets. So publicly, I can invite you to come and take at least 20-30% of Slintech, and it will really help speed up something which you're very passionate about.
Thank you, Ashraf. That was nicely done in the presence of so many people. But yeah, actually, we've started conversations with them, and which is why I'm so impressed with their capability. But you can be sure that we will re-engage post-COVID.
No, don't wait for post-COVID. I think this is the time to re-engage. Maybe I'll give you a call in the afternoon.
If you can send me a curfew pass, I'd be happy to do that.
That's my responsibility. Don't worry about it.
I just had one question from my side. I mean, one of the biggest challenges most businesses have faced over the years is an export of our best talent, that they have been all lining up to leave the country either as permanent immigrants or temporary immigrants. I'm presuming that some of these people will be coming back. Do you see an opportunity that you will, of course, you have other challenges also, but this talent shortage, that it might be a blessing, that, you know, an inherent talent in the country may be more available to the local industry?
Can I answer that?
Yes.
I believe it is all rupees and cents or dollars and cents. I think the industry, you see, we cannot afford to bring our housemaids back who earn a couple of $100, right? So we should not wait that these guys come back because of this huge issue, right? That may be a short-term advantage. But I think as private sector, we should strive to see whether can we pay salaries in par with what their market value is, and market value means worldwide. So I think if that is our policy, then I think we will be able to jump above all the other countries. All the other panelists have said we have the talent. Our size is small enough and big enough to be relevant, right? So I think that's what we should pursue. And not hope on COVID to bring those poor guys back where they will earn half of what they were earning over there.
If I can add something to that, Murtaza. We studied, I think, at the AFD, the example of Israel. And in fact, today, if you see the list yesterday of the top 20 places to be in the event of a future crisis, Sri Lanka features pretty high in that list. If we were to follow the example of Dubai and adopt something like a freelance visa that would enable freelancers who don't fulfill the BOI criteria to come to set up business in design and so on, I think there are certain targeted areas where we lack capability. It could be in, I mean, where there's limited capability rather, for example, in design, in shopper marketing, in certain areas where I think Sri Lanka could genuinely benefit more than the expatriates. Of course, many of our Sri Lankan expatriates might hold foreign citizenship, but beyond the expatriates, to also attract specific skills from overseas to join us.
Okay, thank you very much. On that note, I would like to bring today's session to an end. At one point, I believe that on the Zoom webinar, we had about over 500 people and an equal number of people coming through Facebook. So there was almost 1,000 people listening in. We certainly kept people engaged because still on Zoom, we have about 365. I'm not sure about the number on Facebook. Also, I couldn't take all the questions. There was over 130 questions that came in, and I was only able to take the ones that were voted up. There were also some questions that came in the chat session, and I was only able to select a few because it's not viable for me to take everyone's question. I thank the team at Advocata who put this together, and I hope that it has been of interest to the audience and people like Prabhash who are represented in government and anybody else from government who was listening in. There was some valuable feedback and input, some of it more short-term measures, but a lot of it in the medium term. And the word crisis in Greece, which comes from Greek, means doing things differently. So hopefully we can't waste this crisis, because in a time of crisis, all the vested interests and entrenched interests dilute, and it gives you an opening to do things differently. So let's hope that we come out of this huge disaster for the better. And on that note, I conclude today's session. Goodbye to everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.